With God, nothing is impossible. He can give supernatural strength to the weak and the weary, so no giant is big enough, no demon in hell is powerful enough to stop God's people when they are on a mission with Him. With the Lord, victory is always guaranteed, even if it takes a long time.
Welcome to Mission 66. Join John Matthews and Esther Sisulu as they uncover courage, faith, and God's promises in the book of Joshua. In partnership with Dr. Luis Seo and TWR, we're bringing Scripture to life, chapter by chapter. Grab your study guide at mission66.org and follow along, and see how God's Word speaks to your life today. Now here's Esther.
Thanks for joining us today as we continue studying the Old Testament book of Joshua, who we've now learned was the army general leading the children of Israel into the conquest of Canaan, as they had been ordered to displace the Baal worshippers and occupy that land for the Lord. Now, Joshua wrote down the details for us about each conquest, and it's clear that the enemies of Israel weren't going to give up without a fight. Well, now we've come to chapters 11 and 12, where our teacher, John Matthews, will present us the theme, Analyzing the General's Journal.
Thank you very much, Esther. So good to be with you.
I love that we can be together once again, John, and good. Having a look at the General's Journal.
We certainly are. And this is Mission 66, as Esther said there. And we're finding Joshua here now operating under direct orders from God Himself. And in doing so, what is He doing? He's showing his capability as a leader. And so by way of quick recap, in previous episodes, we've seen how he fought battle after battle, and God was with him, even lending him a physical hand by showering the opposition with giant hailstones, and even making the sun stand still until Joshua was victorious. What impact did this have on the inhabitants of the land? Well, it certainly seemed to stiffen their resolve in this case and make them more determined to resist, because it says they came out with all their troops, a great horde, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, to fight against Israel. But what would happen? Let's find out. Chapter 11, we're going to start reading here at verse 6. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So Joshua and all his warriors came suddenly against them by the waters of Merom and fell upon them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel, who struck them and chased them as far as Great Sidon and Misrephoth-Maim, and eastward as far as the valley of Mizpah. And they struck them until he left none remaining. And Joshua did to them just as the Lord said to him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. So God gives this promise of victory, but He didn't allow Joshua's army to take and use the captured horses nor the chariots in future conquests. They were not going to be needed. Why? Well, the people were to rely upon God and Him alone. And it must be said that Joshua did quite well enough without the enemy's chariots. Here we go in verse 10. And Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hazor, and struck its king with the sword, for Hazor formerly was the head of all those kingdoms. And they struck with the sword all who were in it, devoting them to destruction. There was none left that breathed. And he burned Hazor with fire, and all the cities of those kings, and all their kings Joshua captured, and struck them with the edge of the sword, devoting them to destruction, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. But none of the cities that stood on mounds did Israel burn, except Hazor alone, that Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities and the livestock the people of Israel took for their plunder. But every person they struck with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they did not leave any who breathed. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. And so Joshua took all that land, the hill country, and all the Negeb, and all the land of Goshen, and the lowland, and the Arabah, and the hill country of Israel, and its lowland from Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir, as far as Baal Gad, in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. And he captured all their kings, and struck them, and put them to death. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings, and there was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. They took them all in battle, for it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be devoted to destruction, and should receive no mercy, but be destroyed, just as the Lord commanded Moses. See, this account uses similar descriptions between the attitudes of these Canaanite kings and the attitude of the Egyptian Pharaoh who enslaved the Israelites and wouldn't let them go. It says that the Lord hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel so that he might destroy them totally. If these cities had surrendered to Joshua, well, they would have been spared. If they agreed to serve Israel, they would have lived. But let's go on to verse 21, where it says that Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal allotments. And the land had rest from war. You can almost feel the land breathing a sigh of relief.
I bet, as you said it. Rest from war. Wow.
I know. And so, look, interesting that they refer to these Anakim, who were the giants, which we heard of when the spies looked over the land all those years before, of which they'd been so afraid. So the people, they cried, didn't they, and wept in fear that there's no way we can take on the giants. And it filled them with fear. Well, when they step in by faith to what God had told them to do, what happens to the giants? Well, look, they don't turn out to be any problem whatsoever for Joshua, because God is with him. And just as the Lord was with David against the giant Goliath of Gath, we're going to learn about that later. What a story that is. He was also here with Joshua. But moving on now to chapter 12 of, let's call it the General's Journal, Joshua the General. There is first a summary of the Canaanite kings that had been conquered by Israel whilst they were still under the leadership of Moses. This is what Joshua 12 says from verse 1. Now these are the kings of the land whom the people of Israel defeated and took possession of their land beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise, from the valley of the Arnon to Mount Hermon, with all the Arabah eastward. Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon and ruled from Aroah, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, and from the middle of the valley as far as the river Jabbok, the boundary of the Ammonites, that is, half of Gilead, and the Arabah to the Sea of Chinneroth eastward, and in the direction of Beth Jeshimoth, to the Sea of the Araba, the Salt Sea, southward to the foot of the slopes of Pisgah, and Og, king of Bashan, one of the remnant of the Rephaim who lived at Ashtaroth and at Edrei, and ruled over Mount Hermon and Salikah, and all Bashan to the boundary of the Geshurites and the Maccathites, and over half of Gilead to the boundary of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the people of Israel defeated them. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave their land for a possession to the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh.
Kudos to you for pronouncing all of that, because I don't know if I could have done it myself.
Well, it was quite a mouthful, wasn't it?
It most certainly was. I mean, whew, but you did it so well.
Well, thank you very much. I thought I was going to get tripped up along the way, but here we are. We made it after 893 takes.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, that's right. And then, yeah, thank you, though, for the encouragement. And then from verse 7, the text recounts the list of kings who had been subdued under the leadership of Joshua. And in fact, there were 31 of them. We're not going to list them all right now. You can certainly read the list for yourself. That's in Joshua chapter 12. It talks about conquests on the west side of the Jordan River. If you've a map handy, you'll be able actually to trace the cities that were conquered, because these were real cities, and there has been plenty of archaeological evidence which has been unearthed to prove that these places existed. And the list of conquests includes Sihon, the king of the Amorites, Og, the king of Bashan, the hill country, the western foothills, the Araba, the mountain slopes, the wilderness, and the Negev desert in the southern region. So you've got the king of Jericho, of Ai, Jerusalem, Hebron. Well, these are major towns which are going to be mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. In fact, Lachish, Eglon, Hormon, Bethel, Megiddo, Kadesh, and others will all be mentioned. And you know, it says, Esther, how Joshua gave their land to the tribes of Israel as possession according to their allotments. Now, if we look at the present-day land of Israel, it's part of the ancient land of Canaan. It measures no more than 400 kilometers from north to south and no more than 100 kilometers from east to west. Now, in land measurement, the whole thing is only slightly larger than the total land area of the Canary Islands. I don't know if you know those, but it's certainly not a big area whatsoever. In the north, you have the Sea of Galilee, from which the Jordan River runs south all the way down to the Dead Sea. That's the Salty Sea in the southern region. And so what we see happening right here in these chapters is that Joshua conquers the land piece by piece. In chapter 11, for example, you've got a reference to his campaign in the north. In fact, the region around Hazor was excavated in recent years, and those excavations have revealed 3 different levels of destruction of Hazor, to which dates have been established by archaeologists, and one of the levels of destruction was dated as the 13th century BC, that means before Christ, which was close to the date of Joshua's conquest. So, look, we're talking in the Bible here about real places, real events, and the real conquest of Canaan by Joshua as part of the world's history. And so what God had promised, and he did so hundreds of years before Joshua came along, is now finally being fulfilled. The land was being conquered, and it was God's doing. The Canaanite people, well, God looked upon them and saw their behavior. He saw their hearts. He saw their way of life, which was described as wicked. And God brought forth his divine judgment over them, and he involved all the Israelites in the occupation of the territory. And the book of Joshua, it's a kind of military journal. Actually, it's got that sort of feel to it, isn't it, as we get into it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Such a systematic documentation of the conquests of Israel. And John, This is a great episode. And friend, we're glad you could be here with us on Mission 66. So as you listen, I hope that you will stay with us just a little bit further as we raise some questions about what we've read. Now, the first question I have is from chapters 11 and 12 of Joshua. And that is, how long did this all take? I mean, the written account talks about the many different battles, which actually seem to have been done in a very short period of time. Could you explain that for us?
Yeah, well, it is, isn't it, Esther? A little bit like reading a history book about any other war of history, which can be summarized quickly by historians. But the whole war of which we've just been talking about actually took many years.
Wow.
Estimates are, we just kind of don't think about that. You think, this...
It happened one after
quickly.
in succession.
Yeah, so estimates are that if we count from Moses' first conflict with Sihon, king of the Amorites, until Joshua's final displacements of the Amorite nation on the west of the Jordan, which is when we heard that they finally had that rest. I want to say it's at least 7 or 8 years. So we're going to see actually next time that Joshua was an old man and there was still plenty of land to be conquered. So the conquest stage wasn't complete yet, even after Joshua had gone. So let's bear in mind that is the case, and also that right after the taking of Ai, the Israelites made this deal with the Gibeonites, and so they didn't get rid of all the Canaanites as God had ordered them to do. And in several different places, the Bible points out how the Israelites ended up living in peace among some of the Canaanites, having a close relationship. But because it wasn't as God had ordained in his wisdom, he knew there was going to be danger if the Canaanites were to coexist. Well, the truth is that it was going to pose a significant problem in the future.
Yeah, you will certainly see that as we continue in the book of Joshua. But I want us to have a look at chapter 11, verse 21, because here we see these Anakites being mentioned again, and these are the sons of Anak. Those were those huge giants, right, that frightened the people of Israel, so much so that we read back in Numbers chapter 13. Now, Joshua himself, we know, was one of the spies who saw these huge giants from afar, and he said, the land is full of giants. Now, we need to ask, was it giants in the way that we understand or the way that we describe giants to be?
Yeah, and even the term a giant sort of comes with some kind of mystery and mystique, doesn't it? And maybe clearly, in the case of those 10 spies who spied over the land, a real sense of fear and uncertainty. And there's no doubt the Anakites were very large men. The Bible does mention the Anakites also in Deuteronomy. We don't, though, have all the details about them. But remember that we mentioned before that Og, the king of Bashan, slept on a bed that measured about 4.5 meters long. Now, he may not have been 4 meters tall, but that is a super king-sized bed.
That's
right there.
A big
isn't it?
guy.
4.5 meters long.
Goodness.
I'm not sure whether his toes sort of dipped over the edge there, or whether he was able to tuck in and pull his duvet up.
We can only imagine.
Yeah, it would have been a big duvet as well, wouldn't it? But there were other giants mentioned. Don't forget that, such as most famously, I suppose, in the Bible was Goliath. He was the best known of the giants, and he was killed by David. We'll get to that story soon on Mission 66 or later on. Now, the height of the giant Goliath was reported to be 6 cubits and a span. Now, a cubit is the distance between a man's forefinger and his elbow, or let's say 18 inches, and a span was the distance between the tip of a man's thumb to his little finger. So let's call that 10 inches. Depends how big your hand is, doesn't it, really? But Goliath then was thought to be about 9 foot 10 inches tall, or 2.9 meters.
Wow.
So he was a tall chap.
He was a very, very tall guy.
Yeah. And even today, actually, we've got people who are taller in the world than 2.5 meters. Some basketball players are above 7 foot tall. Tallest man in the world right now is taller than 8 foot. Ooh. So, but compared to God, let's be honest, nobody is big. And the main emphasis here is that the people of God were courageous and fearless to the point of defeating even the Anakites. And, so much so that there's not any description about what that battle was. So it was not a matter of course, there's no doubt about that, but it was all in God's timing and doing.
Yeah, you know what? This is some good stuff, and I want us to keep this going looking at verse 20 of chapter 11, because it talks about the Lord hardening the hearts of the Amorites so that they would fight and be destroyed. Now, couldn't God have softened their hearts so that they would be, they would surrender and then ultimately be spared?
Yeah, I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
I feel the same sometimes when I read these passages. Lord, why not soften all their hearts, and why not bring them all into the fold? And look, we just don't know why, but we know that God is all wise and all knowing, and he sees people's hearts and he sees what the future holds as well. So, God says, anyone who comes to me, I will not turn away. And we talked about this before, didn't we?
Yeah.
Specifically, most recently, when we saw how God hardened Pharaoh's heart so he wouldn't let the people go. And it was in order to bring judgment upon him. It doesn't mean that God made their hearts hard for no reason and that they no longer then had any choice or say in that matter. It only means that God doesn't override our will. So people harden their own hearts when they stubbornly refuse God's order. And God allows them to do that. God gives everybody free choice. So we're all at liberty to choose whatever way that we want to live our lives. If they then want to harden their own hearts, God doesn't stop someone from doing that. And I think along with this comes the question actually of why God allows evil to prosper in the world, when he, being God, he could stop it at any time that he wanted to.
That's a big question, John.
Shall I throw that one back to you?
I mean, you're our teacher here, and I listen as you teach.
Yeah, I look in, and some of the questions, the big questions, we can't provide categoric answers to because we're not God. But in his wisdom, he does allow people to declare which side ultimately they're going to be on. Now, he's ultimately patient. So while somebody may choose very early, I'm going to be on God's side, it may take somebody else 70 or 80 years. And God has patience with that. But each day, in reality, by our words and by our actions, we do register whether we are for God or against him. So those who demonstrate obedience and faith in him in spite of all the wrong things and the evil going on around them and in the world, well, the truth is that God will reward that. But people who continually harden their hearts toward God, well, they're actually condemning themselves. So look, and I mean this, it's important that we pray that we ourselves and all those who we know and come into contact with would have their hearts softened and would be open to the voice and path of God. And maybe we, even us, us faltering people who believe in God, maybe he can use, and well, I say maybe, he can use even us to shine light into the world around us.
Well, John, thanks for that. That's really encouraging. A very good word there. I'm thinking back to something that you shared earlier on in the reading. You talked about the conquest of the land of Canaan. And that kind of provides us the geography of the land. And now I want to talk about archaeology. If excavations have encountered any problems connecting these places to the tribes?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And generally speaking, a great deal of what is found here in the Bible has been proven by archaeology itself, despite the passage of time that has passed, especially from Joshua's time, because that's another 13 or 1400 years before Jesus arrived. But much of it, as I said, has been proven, and that obviously is ongoing work, because as I mentioned, there are thousands of years of history right there in that land, and it has to be excavated really carefully so as not to damage any of the artifacts and the relics that have to be found and analysed. So it's not simple, nor is it easy work. And a lot of this work has been done around the locations of Jericho, as we mentioned before. And much digging has also been done around this city we've been talking about of Ai. And then they found something that was called the Amana letters. These were about 20,000 letters, which were actual correspondences between the Canaanites and the Egyptians. Here we go. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Yeah, so they were found in kind of a central library of the time. And these letters have references that seem to fit into the 14th century BC. They talk about a people called the Habiru, who were invading the land. Habiru is assumed to be the word for Hebrews.
Wow.
And as we say, archaeology is always a work in progress, because who knows what may still be buried underground waiting to be discovered. But let's wait around for a few more years and see what else may turn up. But, personally, I don't need archaeology to prove anything to me that's recorded in the Bible, because the writers of the Bible themselves have proven their trustworthiness, and it's proven true over thousands of years. And Jesus himself verified these Old Testament accounts as accurate. And look, I can understand why people sometimes doubt. Maybe they want somebody to rise from the dead to convince humanity about God. But he said, if they don't believe Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even, Jesus said, if someone were to rise from the dead.
Oh, well, that certainly gives us something to think about, and especially appreciate some of this history as we delve into geography and archaeology. Definitely a well-rounded study today. So how about we get into the summary of these 2 chapters today?
Yeah, let's do that. And we looked, didn't we, Esther, at the Journal of the General, and we saw Joshua's very own account of the conquests and mapped out his campaigns throughout the central, northern and southern regions of the land of Canaan. And what is the major theme then from today? Well, I think it is that God will have his way, and his way is by far the best way. He had promised Jacob's descendants that they would inhabit Canaan, and they were going to have it no matter the obstacles. Humanly speaking, we'd wonder, wouldn't we, how a group of fugitives from Egypt who were slaves, disorganized certainly in the beginning, could travel long distances through a waterless wasteland and then arrive in a new land where there were giants and many warlike hostile people. And what would they do? Well, they'd drive them back. They'd cross rivers on dry ground. They'd cause the walls of a major city to just collapse. And they'd press forward in their conquest of this land and then have victory over those other nations whilst keeping their national identity and their sense of religious life intact. But that is exactly what Israel did. And it teaches us that with God, nothing is impossible. He can move water aside or bring it out of a rock. He can give supernatural strength to the weak and to the weary. No giant is big enough, no demon in hell is anywhere near powerful enough to stop God's people when they are on a mission with him.
Amen.
And so with the Lord, victory is always guaranteed, even if it takes a while.
And you know what? We have a faithful shepherd who will never lead us astray.
No, so true.
Yeah.
So good, isn't it?
This is Mission 66. Thanks, John, for such a wonderful episode. And friends, we invite you to join us again next time as we continue through this fascinating book of Joshua. And hey, if you have a comment or a question, feel free to leave it on our Facebook page at Mission 66. Hey, we're also on Instagram. Simply type in Mission 66 and give us a like. Well, until next time, dear friend, I'm Esther for the entire team. God bless you.
Let me remind you to head on over to mission66.org to download your study guide. It's free. Dive deeper into the Bible teaching of John Matthews and learn how it all relates to your Christian walk. Tag along with John and Esther on our Bible road trip episode by episode. Your study guide's waiting for you at mission66.org. That's where you can also post your questions or make a comment, and even help out with a donation to keep Mission 66's heart beating around the world. Hop on over to mission66.org. Mission 66 is a partnership of TWR and the ministry of Dr. Luis Sayao.